Welcome to the debate. The source material we're looking at today captures a deceptively simple conversation about the weather. It's a topic that, interestingly, moves pretty quickly from just physical sensation right into some quite profound philosophical reflection.
hmm And its significance, I think, really lies in this sort of intellectual fork it presents. It leaves us grappling with a central question, doesn't it?
Exactly. Does the primary significance of weather, as articulated by the speakers in the source, reside in its direct, observable psychological impact, the way it affects mood, energy, comfort? Or does its true weight ultimately rest in its utility as a profound metaphorical framework, something for moral instruction, life philosophy?
Right.
So I'll be arguing that the philosophical, the didactic utility is the ultimate conclusion they reach, that the speakers themselves assign the highest value to weather's role as a teacher.
And I come at it from a different angle. While I absolutely acknowledge the beauty of those final philosophical points, I really contend that the fundamental significance stays rooted in the immediate, the concrete psychological and experiential effects they describe first. Those beautiful life lessons, they aren't the primary significance. They're derived from, and I think secondary to, that foundation of personal, immediate feeling.
Okay, well, my position holds that the conversation's core meaning is overwhelmingly philosophical. Yes, they start with individual psychological states, Arjun enjoying cloudy weather because it feels peaceful and refreshing, but they make a very explicit, I think intentional, pivot away from just comfort and mood towards a grander utility. They elevate the whole phenomenon by concluding that weather, quote, teaches us patience, hope, and gratitude. And the explicit textual evidence for this shift, it's Ria's definitive statement. Weather is not just about comfort, it's also about life. That final move to the analogy, life is like weather, sometimes bright, sometimes stormy, well, that signals that they themselves locate the weather's ultimate meaning in its ability to model these bigger existential truths. They're consciously moving beyond it just being a simple mood enhancer.
Okay, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on it. If you actually look at the architecture of the conversation, the foundational blocks, they're built purely on direct sensory and emotional input. Ria notes rainy days make everything feel so calm, right? And the most direct sort of causal claim in the entire text is that weather affects our mood so much. Sunny days make us energetic, rainy days make us relaxed. These psychological effects, they're the raw material. The claims about character, patience, hope, gratitude, they aren't independent observations. They are, I think, sophisticated ways to manage or explain those foundational, very concrete emotional responses to the weather. The significance is initially felt and experienced, and only then, afterwards, is it sort of intellectualized into a life lesson.
But doesn't that force us to really challenge the relationship between that simple comfort and the profound moral lesson?
Exactly. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the lessons could even exist without those initial mood effects. Just think about Arjun's perfect winter day description. A hot cup of tea, a warm blanket, and reading a good book. That's a description of actively, deliberately manufacturing coziness, specifically to counteract the environmental discomfort of winter.
Well, yes, but
If the weather didn't first affect them psychologically, if the cold didn't make the comfort necessary, or the rain didn't induce that calm feeling, what philosophical leverage would the weather even hold? The insight that we learn character traits, it seems less like an objective lesson from nature and more like a kind of high-minded justification for a preferred pre-existing comfort state, calm, relaxed. The significance is rooted in the feeling, and the philosophy just comes along later to validate that feeling.
that's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You're focusing on the psychological statements as descriptions of sort of what is happening, but I'd contend that the philosophical claims are prescriptive, they're normative, they address what should be learned from what's happening. And this move, I think, is crucial because it establishes a pretty clear hierarchy where utility for life surpasses utility for mere comfort. If their main goal were simply comfort, as you suggest, then the constant changeability they discuss, those rapid shifts from summer in the morning and winter by evening, well, that would just be described as annoying, wouldn't it? Or disruptive, a challenge to their preferred mood. But instead, they pivot. They frame that variability as a valuable lesson about life's transience. So they're choosing to interpret the discomfort or the necessity of adapting as the point of significance rather than just focusing on the resulting calm or energy.
Okay.
The significance, therefore, lies not in the data point of feeling relaxed, but in the normative instruction that they assign to that data point.
I agree. The conversation moves into the prescriptive domain, yes. But the gravity of that prescription, it's still contingent on the experiential reality, isn't it? If they didn't feel the need for patience during, say, a frustrating stretch of waiting for a clear day, the lesson would just be hollow. It wouldn't mean anything. Let's look closely at that pivot again. Weather is not just about comfort.
Exactly. And I want to reinforce that statement because it really is the linchpin here. It's the explicit rejection of personal comfort as the defining measure of weather's importance. And Arjun immediately follows up this shift, doesn't he? He connects weather to macro necessities. Without rain, we wouldn't have fresh water or green fields. This proves they're actively thinking about weather through the lens of survival, of existential necessity, which inherently requires the kind of moral and philosophical framework I'm arguing for. By moving the discussion to fresh water and green fields, they're grounding the weather's importance in its role as a fundamental life regulator, which is, far more significant than just how calm Rhea feels on a Tuesday afternoon.
That's a compelling argument, yes. And the reference to fresh water certainly adds weight, but have you considered how quickly they actually abandon the material necessity? Yes. Okay. Rain is vital. It sustains life. Fine. But the discussion doesn't linger on hydrology or agriculture, does it? Immediately after mentioning water and fields, Rhea jumps straight back to the moral application. It teaches us patience, hope, and gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation isn't fundamentally sustained by the material necessity of rain. It uses the fact of that vital necessity to justify the high-stakes, internal, human experience of needing rain, which manifests as hope and patience, and receiving it, which manifests as gratitude. These are all internal psychological states. Highly charged ones, sure, because they relate to survival, but internal nonetheless. The essential nature of rain is simply evidence supporting the gravity of the psychological reaction to it. The psychological impact, how waiting for rain makes us feel, that remains the ongoing focus, not the rain itself.
I think this brings us to a crucial point about maybe definitional precision and the speaker's certainty. They seem very certain that weather affects their mood. That word affects, it implies a direct, undeniable causality, right? A stimulus-response relationship that is physically and emotionally felt. Now contrast that certainty with the terms teaches and is like, as in life is like weather. These imply metaphor, utility, interpretation.
Right.
So when interpreting significance, we have to ask, which function is deemed more reliable or central by the speakers themselves? They seem certain, definitive about the mood effect. They are applying metaphor when discussing the lessons. Doesn't this suggest the causal link, the experiential anchor, is the foundation of their entire understanding of weather's significance? You can't reliably teach something if the students haven't first definitively experienced the input, the feeling.
I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning because it feels like it attempts to reduce the intellectual synthesis back down to its component parts, while affects certainly denotes that immediate causality, the final articulation. Life is like weather. That's where the speakers achieve the highest level of sort of conceptual clarity. It is the ultimate frame of meaning they land on. If they had stopped the conversation after simply noting rainy days make us feel relaxed, okay, then we would agree the significance is purely psychological. But they didn't stop there, did they? They synthesized the change, the necessity, the comfort, the discomfort into a single comprehensive philosophical model. The significance is the model itself. You seem to be treating the mood effects, the energetic sun, the relaxed rain, as the ultimate truth, when in reality they're just data points used to construct the broader, concluding philosophical framework. The significance lies not in the raw data, but in the framework constructed from it, which gives meaning to the chaotic inputs of the atmosphere.
But why even build the framework? We only build these frameworks to manage the feelings the weather imposes on us, surely. If weather were merely a neutral force, we wouldn't need to assign it virtues like patience or hope. We assign these virtues because the experiential reality, the disappointment of a storm canceling plans, the sheer joy of the sun after days of rain, is so powerful and psychologically engaging. The philosophical structure feels like it's merely the coping mechanism for the emotional reality. You can't really discuss the lessons taught by a storm without acknowledging the fear or inconvenience the storm first instilled. The emotion is the prerequisite.
I would argue the philosophical structure isn't just a coping mechanism, but actually a deliberate act of transmuting raw experience into wisdom. The speakers aren't just reacting to the weather, they are actively imposing meaning onto it. When Rhea says, "We need both," referring to sunny and stormy days, well, that's a philosophical acceptance of duality, isn't it? It moves far beyond just a personal preference for a comfortable state. This acceptance, this teaching aspect, that is the normative significance that supersedes the simple descriptive statement of, "I feel energetic." The true power of the conversation, I believe, is that they refuse to let the weather merely be an atmospheric condition. They insist it be a moral teacher.
Yet to achieve that status of moral teacher, the weather has to first be a profound psychological influencer. The philosophical framework is powerful because it successfully captures and rationalizes the depth of that initial psychological influence. The significance is therefore circular, maybe, but if we are forced to choose primacy, the immediate, personal, and concrete psychological impact must come first. It provides the emotional and experiential ground from which these lessons spring.
Ultimately, I maintain that while the philosophical claims are deeply compelling and beautifully stated, their existence and their power are fundamentally rooted in the observable, personal psychological responses, feeling peaceful, energetic, relaxed, or cozy. These immediate, concrete emotional states provide the initial, irrefutable evidence for weather's significance, making the experiential influence the primary driver of the entire conversation, in my view.
And I reiterate that the true power of this material lies in the speaker's conscious decision to explicitly elevate the discussion beyond individual mood. By consciously framing weather not just as an influencer, but as a teacher of virtues, patience, hope, gratitude, and deploying it as the ultimate metaphor for life's inevitable changes, the speakers grant the philosophical utility primacy. They chose to emphasize the wisdom derived from the experience, moving from descriptive comfort to prescriptive wisdom.
It's clear, though, isn't it? The material powerfully demonstrates how deeply intertwined the experiential, the psychological, and the philosophical interpretations of nature's simple phenomena truly are.
Indeed, the source material beautifully illustrates this very human journey, the move from personal feeling to shared wisdom. We are left, I suppose, to weigh whether the primary significance lies in that immediate, concrete feeling, or in the resulting lesson that the feeling enables, acknowledging that both layers of interpretation are deeply woven into the fabric of the conversation.